Please listen up. Directly after President Trump ordered a drone strike that took out Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, nearly 800 different Facebook advertisements praising Trump as a strong commander-in-chief, they flooded the internet. Some of those ads asked voters to take the, quote, official Trump military survey, which led directly to the president's re-election website. While that is misleading, even wrong, it is absolutely allowed, and it is happening. It is all just a preview of how much this election will be fought and ultimately won or lost on Facebook and other social media outlets. Joining me now to discuss, Annie Karni, New York Times White House correspondent, who's behind a new report on the president's Facebook ad blitz, and Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios. Annie, take us through the Trump campaign, how they reached and specifically micro-targeted voters in the aftermath of the back and forth with Iran.
Well, this was a surprise for the campaign, too. They have been very clear that the messaging for the campaign comes directly from the White House and from Trump. They can build him an organization, but they're not trying to push a message that's not by him. But they felt like they were on solid ground with a message about the economy, and they saw that among their voters, impeachment was actually motivating small dollar donations and getting people revved up. So they felt very steady on these two messages. They're thrown for a bit of a curveball with the Soleimani raid, but this was an example of how quickly and nimble this campaign tries to respond to news and politicize it. So they immediately came out with 800 distinct Facebook ads trying to present this is a commander-in-chief moment, and they targeted specific voters in battleground states with these ads. What's interesting is that in my reporting last week, I talked to a lot of Trump critics and critics of this raid who pointed me to this USA Today poll that showed that by a vast majority, Americans felt less safe because of this raid, and saw it as reinforcing their view of Trump as an erratic decision maker. Clearly, the Trump campaign is seeing something very different among a more targeted, not a national group, because they saw this as something they could push.
Then let's stay right there. Sarah, people keep pointing to national polls, saying nationally people don't feel good about what the president did in Iran. But the president's strategy is to go directly to those battleground states, even micro-target themselves down to counties. Is that strategy working when it comes to his focus, which is getting reelected?
I think it's probably working because they're going to test it, and if it wasn't, they wouldn't be running it that way. I was looking at some of those targets in Facebook's ad library, and one thing I found that was interesting is a lot of these ads over-index on targeting to men. You can imagine that a message of bravado would resonate much more closely with some of the voters in those battleground states, especially states with disenfranchised voters, maybe in the Rust Belt in the Midwest, than they would women who might be worried about what this means for children going to war. So I think that the president's campaign is absolutely being strategic in the way that it targets these messages. And I think, to Annie's point, the fact that there's 800 different variations of creative says that they're not done testing what's going to resonate the best, and they'll continue to message off of this.
Annie, Facebook isn't changing the rules. That's clear. This is going to be a steel cage match getting into people's homes. Social media has become the connective tissue of our society. Is there a Democrat who, from a digital strategic perspective, who's competing with the president?
Well, we see two things going on. The Trump campaign is clearly targeting Bernie Sanders more than they had been in the past. He might be helpful to them in some of their states, but he could be threatening to them on a social media scale. He has, on the populism front, he has a real grassroots movement behind him. And we see Bloomberg completely changing the money game in this race. Over the weekend, we saw Bloomberg saying he's going to spend $1 billion, even if he's not the nominee, even if it's Bernie Sanders. This changes the calculus for the Trump campaign, who had a strategy that relied on having more money than any Democratic candidate and a long runway ahead just for being the incumbent while the Democrats figure out their nominating process. We saw Trump tweet this morning about mini Mike Bloomberg and all of his money. We saw a competition over Super Bowl ads between them. Trump said he's spending $5 million. Bloomberg said 10. Then the Trump campaign said they're also spending 10. The Bloomberg money is going to change the strategy for the Trump campaign.
Sarah, we know disinformation is a huge problem, but we're not getting any new regulation between now and November. Given that, what needs to be the strategic moves for Democrats to get into all of those homes, specifically in battleground states where this election is going to be decided?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that's scary. If you take a look at the way that money gets spent online, take a look at 2018 midterms, even 2016, you leverage Facebook for the data. You've written some great pieces about this using and hawking merchandise or ads, and then you transition that data into video platforms, things like Google's YouTube. So in one sense, Stephanie, we might even be too late, because at this point, what we've needed to garner from Facebook is going to start being used for other platforms off of Facebook, like YouTube, other social media, more video-centric things, and local TV. What I would suggest that Democrats need to do moving forward is to think about how do they, once the Trump campaign starts to leverage other platforms, go after Facebook even harder so that towards the end of the race, the general, they can have better informed creative for those GOTV buys on local television. At this point, that's probably the best that they can do. The other thing I'd say is work with the big spenders. So that's, as Annie said, Michael Bloomberg and other big spenders, to make sure that you get their data to inform whatever candidate is winning.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.